So a gentleman in town was selling a bunch of tools out of his dad's old toolbox, and I just picked up the lot. In there, for a first project, I thought I would work on this small little screwdriver. I thought it was awfully heavy given its size. It's only maybe 3 or 4 inches long. And after asking around and doing some research, I discovered this was a ratcheting screwdriver, specifically made by a company called Goodell Pratt sometime in the early 1900s. Another company was around from the late 1800s until it was bought out by the Miller's Fall Company in 1931, I believe. So this was obviously made sometime before then, but I don't know much more. If you know more, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, because I love these old tools. Anyway, the way it works is you turn this little knob one way or the other, and that engages the ratchet, so it either ratchets while you tighten or loosen the screwdriver. So, as you can see, there's a good bit of rust on the shaft of the screwdriver. So the first thing I decided to do was to just dismantle the thing and get to sanding. So put a little bit of oil in there. I didn't know how this screw was attached or how big it was. It turns out it was a super duper tiny little screw, so I'm glad I didn't put a whole lot of force on it to try to get it out. But I had this small little set of precision screwdrivers that I was able to eventually loosen it up with and set it aside. But as you can see, it's super tiny. Was then able to slide that brass sleeve off and access the ratcheting system. There was a small little plate there, and everything else was pretty well fixed. It looks like probably with the right tools and know-how, I could have taken the entire ratcheting system apart, but those pieces were getting to be at the level that I considered darn near microscopic, and I was just not wanting to take them apart, nor could I see any obvious way to do so without just making a royal mess of this project. So I took an abrasive Scotch pad to the metal here just to get some of the gunk off of it, polish that brass up a little bit. It did a pretty good job. I wasn't too, or I was rather I was pretty happy with it all. I did later on in the video. You'll see I went back and actually took a polishing wheel to it to really give it a nice shine. But this got the bulk of the gunk and junk off of it. This is a tool that I want to turn into a user, so I want this thing looking and feeling as good as I can, so it'll give me many, many more years of life. So just with that little bit of work, it already looks a whole lot better. There's that hole in the brass ferrule that I can't do much about, but everything else is in pretty good shape here. So I then took to trying to sand the shaft off. This is really the first time I've ever worked on a project that was quite this heavily rusted. And I put some 220 grit on there and just tried to work some of that old rust off. And it did a pretty good job. But as you'll see in time, I eventually decided it was worth going after it with something a little bit more aggressive. I eventually decided to get this 2x4 out. It let me hold it at a better angle so I could keep the bevel that's on the tip of the screwdriver. And again, it worked pretty well, but there was some pretty significant pitting, especially towards the end of the screwdriver. So, chucked up a wire brush in my drill press and used that to knock a good bit more of the rust off of everything. And again, that made it better. It's not amazing, as you'll see here in a second, but it's about as good as I could get, again, with the tools in my collection and given the age and the damage that had already been done to this thing. And there you go. So it's better, but there's still some corrosion and some pretty deep pitting there. So I took it to the sander. I've seen some other guys on YouTube doing this. I've watched a guy named Scout Crafter who clearly has a lot more metalworking skill than I do. But you know, there's a fine line between taking the pitting out and drastically reshaping the metal there. So of course you're always taking some metal off, but Did the best I could here. By the time I was done, it had kind of made a blade at the end, like a jailhouse shiv. So I tried to dull that down to make it something that would actually fit into a slotted screw head down the road. And that's better. Now here I've got my dad's old bench grinder, and hey, word of advice for you budding YouTubers out there, it's never a good idea to put your tripod on the same surface as a vibrating tool is. Apparently, it makes your video look like you're going blind. So anyway, at the end, it came out pretty good. I eventually just settled on that amount of corrosion left on the shaft of the screwdriver, and I'll just have to live with that. At this point, I just kind of went over it with some fine grit sandpaper. I believe I got up to 800 grit, just trying to knock out some of the scratches that the sandpaper on the belt sander left and polish the metal up a little bit more, so it's got a nice satin finish to it. So yeah, I think that's some 400, and I believe later on I grabbed some 800 to just give it a nice little sheen. Now at this point, there was some pretty gummy finish on the handle that I didn't like, so I tried sanding it. That was gumming up my sandpaper. Then I got a razor blade, utility knife blade, and used that to scrape the finish off, and that seemed to do better. Got a lot of the heavy gunk off. But then I decided to go back to the drill press and chuck it up actually in the drill press. There you go. And then took some sandpaper to it. And that really did a good job of cleaning the wood up pretty well. The end where obviously the previous user's palms would have been and probably would have put some grease and oil into is a little bit dark. Clearly a lot of someone's sweat and grime and gunk got in there, so I could only do so much there, again, without eating away at a lot of the wood here, and I was trying to preserve as much of the original shape and material as possible. I got this up to 320 grit, and it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. It's not brand new, but it's going to be hard to make something that's almost 100 years old look brand new, and I like it to look a little bit aged. So at this point, I got some Brasso out and some Q-tips, and really just set out to start working on polishing up that brass. This is knurled here, so I wanted the Q-tip to kind of get in there and get some of the gunk out of out of the little grooves that are there. This whole process took about 20 minutes or so. There was an awful lot of gunk on the inside as well, so I just used a bunch of Q-tips and a bunch of Brasso and just kept going in there until the Q-tips pretty much started coming out clean. I think it took about 6 or 7 of them, but at this point it looks a whole lot nicer than before. Now it's time to polish up that little screw a little bit and then get it back in. And test the whole thing out, and it works. Put a little bit of oil on the handle here, and then off camera I also put some wax on there to kind of just make it feel a little bit nicer. So I put a few coats of oil on there, let it sit, put a few more coats on, and then applied some wax. And it was good to go. And here's the obligatory glamour shot. Thanks for watching.